G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. It's almost 9:30 in the morning on Sunday, and they reckon that there's going to be a different style of a Sunday morning ritual wherein that we get to hear what the papers say, or what the papers had to say, before the Outsiders and First Dog on the Moon. And I decided I would include it in the weekly ritual because it's probably going to be a lot easier to decode what the Outsiders have to say if we've already also got what the papers had to say. Yes, such is my plan. And as is sometimes the case, we have a swamp wallaby and a bowerbird show up to listen to the Outsiders. So I'll give you a bit of a view of that. Don't know whether she'll still stick around in that position, so readily filmable, while the Outsiders are on, because she's almost finished her dose of bread for the day, so to speak. Can't give them too much. And I'm going to have to go back to having the radio soundtrack on so I know when to actually start filming. So enjoy that little look.
And in the papers this morning, an interesting issue of prejudgment, of the fine line journalism treads when confronted by the temptation of crime's lurid details and other less dramatic concepts like, well, the presumption of innocence. According to the Sunday Telegraph, police are now in possession of a
balcony death tape,
a recording that will presumably play a crucial role in the eventual trial of
Gold Coast playboy Gable Tosty,
a man more formally known as the defendant. This morning's stories, run across the full sweep of News Corp papers, carry detail of the police brief of evidence in the trial of Raight, a body of material that, by the most time-honoured principles of Australian justice, gets its first outing in the press. And so it is that in most major Sunday papers this morning we read this.
No, I just want to go home. These were allegedly the last words of terrified Kiwi tourist Wariana Tapuno Wright as she tried to flee Gold Coast playboy Gable Tosty. The Sunday Mail has obtained exclusive details of the police case against Tosty, who faced court yesterday charged with murdering Ms. Wright only hours after they met on controversial dating site Tinder.
The use of allegedly is important, of course, because none of this evidence has been introduced to a court yet, let alone been tested by that court process. Quite reasonably, the papers report that
audio recordings of her last moments, believed to have been extracted by police technical experts from mobile phones found in a car in the building's basements, were the breakthrough detectives needed to arrest Tosty on Friday after an intensive week-long investigation.
A trial will follow and the accused man maintains his innocence, as they say. But none of that deters this morning's Sunday Telegraph from joining the dots pre-trial in the bold type of its main page 1 headline.
Scared to her death.
Melbourne Sunday Herald Sun comes to a similar conclusion.
Scared to death.
Or to put that in the words of Brisbane's Sunday Mail, a paper nestled deep in the future jury pool of this case.
Scared to death.
The story is full of strong claims and caveats.
She screamed, No, I just want to go home, then died fleeing horror hookup, cops claim. A terrified Wariana Tapuno Wright had been assaulted by date Gable Tosty, feared for her life and was climbing balconies to escape when she fell to her death, police will allege.
And yes, police will, in the fullness of time and in the measured, contested surrounds of a full Supreme Court trial. For this is a case of no small complication. A case in which, as the Sunday Telegraph explains,
police will be relying on High Court findings in other cases of people fleeing in fear and dying to make the murder charge stick.
And in that context, it seems determining whether or not someone was in fact
scared to death
is a pretty critical point. point best judged by the sub-editors of the Sunday Telegraph, the Sunday Mail and the Sunday Herald Sun? And how many will read the full story with its judicious dollopings of cops' claim and allegedlys? And how many will see the face and the headline and come to their own conclusions? Well, you be the judge of that.
Time now for Outsiders. I'm Barry Cassidy, and you're not.
So is. It's 19 away from 10. It is Outsiders, and this week they are. And a fine prop. Lorraine Finlay joins you. She's Director of Mooting, a law lecturer at Murdoch University, way over in the west. Lorraine, good morning.
Good morning.
So early. We are impressed.
But I've got a jumbo cup of coffee next to me, so I'm ready to go.
Excellent news. Fran Bailey joins you too, former Liberal member for McEwen and Minister in the Howard government. Fran, welcome.
Good morning.
Jeff Sparrow too, writer and editor of the literary magazine Overland. Jeff.
How you going?
Well. What a week it has been for the student of politics. We've had claims, counterclaims, retractions, restatements, apologies, all of that in roughly this order.
The poorest people either don't have cars or actually don't drive very far in many cases.
Mm-hmm. And then?
Plainly, I wouldn't say that. But I do want to make it clear that the best thing we can do for all Australians, rich and poor alike, is get the budget back under control.
Fair enough. And then came the climax.
I am really, genuinely sorry that there is any suggestion at all, that I or the government does not care for the most disadvantaged in the community.
Lorraine Finlay, watching this sequence of events and Mr. Hockey's discomfort through the week, what was your impression? Is it? There's been a lot of silly speculation, I guess, about potential reshuffles, but it's not such a good look.
No, and unfortunately it's symptomatic of a few similar events over the last few weeks, and I think just shows a government that really needs to get back to basics when it comes to selling the budget message.
Which is a complicated one.
In some respects, yes, but the bottom line is quite simple. That is, we've got serious structural budgetary problems in Australia and we really need to face up to those.
Which Jeff Sparrow makes it kind of kooky that it would go sort of so off reservation that, I mean, no one will be more aware of the difficult challenge that he's confronting than the Treasurer.
Well, I don't know, the government might be quite pleased it got George Brandis off the front pages, mightn't they? Just as today, Tony Abbott might be wishing that Joe Hockey will say something else to get Tony Abbott off the front pages.
We will come to this,
but no, I mean,
observations on Scotland
the
later.
really interesting thing about this, I think, is that all the focus on the apology and whether Hockey said the wrong thing compared to the almost non-existent focus on whether the policy is actually a good policy or not. So he's apologised for saying that poor people don't use cars, but he hasn't apologised for a policy that would penalise them for doing it.
Well, and what he said sort of through that whole, through the budget discussion onto that territory of fairness, which is where its opponents have wanted that debate to take place all along.
It seems quite a reasonable place for a debate about a budget to take place to me.
But Fran Bailey, I mean, there's been talk about the tough times that this government is facing this early in its first term, and reflections have been made back to the Howard first term where there was all sorts of difficulties as well.
I remember that well.
How do you pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and get back to the message? Recover from a position like this.
Well, I think one of the first things is that people like Joe have got to listen to other people apart from Treasury officials. The budget, exactly the point that Lorraine made earlier, we do have really severe structural problems in our economy. The budget is the main tool for government to address those. But I don't think you can do everything at once. And essentially what the budget was doing was actually removing some benefits, but was actually, in addition to that, charging more for other services. And we can, debate whether these are good, effective, or poor policy. But the reality is that I just don't think you can do it all at once. And if senior government officials are talking more to people in the community take the $7 co-payment, for example. It's standard practice for anyone, any minister in government, to be conducting in confidence discussions with groups that are going to have a big input and a big say into how a change of policy is going to be translated into the community. Now, we hear that there are discussions with the AMA now, but perhaps those discussions should have occurred before the announcement.
And this, Jeff, is, is part of the thing. A government has a right, and not necessarily a mandate, but a right as being the people in power and therefore elected to perceive the issues around the economy as it sees fit and to prosecute those issues in a way of its choosing. Is that part of the problem with this budget, that not only has that issue not been clearly articulated, but the budget too tends to sort of have a bet each way. Some things are directed towards that agenda, some things are not.
Well, I think you have to go back to the last election and what were the policies that this government, with the then opposition, ran on. It was stopping the boats, axing the tax. So there wasn't any...
And addressing the economy.
There wasn't any clear mandate put forward during the election campaign, and which is why I think
disagree with that.
Which is why I think that
everyone's in furious disagreement with you.
No, but I mean, that's why I think it's so asinine simply to talk about a series of gaffes now. It's not that these people, Joe Hockey 6 months ago, everyone was talking about affable Joe Hockey, the people's friend. What's happening now is that there's no coherence to this government, and it's falling apart because it didn't articulate a clear policy that it was taking to the electorate, and it doesn't have a clear constituency for what it's doing, and now it's splintering in all sorts of different directions.
Falling apart the reins, is that fair?
No, I don't think that's fair. And Jeff, fixing the budget was the number one thing the government went to the last election with. So they have a clear mandate to take these measures. And I think part of the reason that Joe Hockey's gone from being affable Joe to a figure who isn't quite as popular anymore is the government's actually having to govern, and they're having to take the tough measures that they said before the election they were going to take. But part of the difficulty is we've lost the coherent story. So rather than looking at the need to address these deep-seated problems in the budget, we focus on whether we should have individual policies that on their own might be very nice to keep. Nobody likes to have budget cuts, but at the end of the day, we need to get back to the reason those cuts are needed in the first place.
Sorry to cut you off, Lorraine, but go on.
Well, and that's the fact that we have serious problems with an ageing population, a greater sense of government entitlement amongst the population, significant overspending, significant net government debt. There's a whole range of challenges that we need to address.
That's part of the problem, isn't it, Fran, in the messaging, that we're focusing on the individual measures. We haven't been convinced of the overall case into which those measures fit.
Look, all of those points that Lorraine mentioned, they're there in spades, and the government certainly has got a mandate to fix these. It went to the election, it spelt it out quite clearly. The difficulty with implementing this change, it doesn't matter what sort of change any government is going to make, it has to make the case for it. And if you think back, the Audit Commission report was late. There wasn't a lot of time from when that was released to when the budget was due to be brought down. And that was a great pity, I thought, because there really wasn't, I think, sufficient time to actually go out into the community and make the case. Look, we really do have serious problems in our economy that must be addressed. But we've got to make that case for change, and rather than focus on the absolute case for change, what's been happening since the delivery of the budget is cherry picking certain aspects of the budget and then debating that. We've got the ridiculous situation that saving measures that Labor itself was prepared to pass before the last election, they're now opposing.
Let's just get to the heart of this. A government with a program for change, a government that's wanting to, prosecute various things towards a particular objective. It's incredibly hard to do that now. We saw the evidence of that through the Gillard government. They find it very hard to make a case for, particular programs. We're seeing that again. Is there something about the way in which politics is now framed, that the sort of the oppositionalism of modern politics that makes it really hard to actually sell a case.
Well, with respect to my fellow panelists, I don't think you can have it both ways. You can't simultaneously say that the government went to the election putting forward these draconian cuts that were going to take place and then complain that they haven't been explained properly. I mean, prior to the election, did people really think that young people were going to be cut off the dole after 6 months? I mean, can anyone explain how this is supposed to work and what these people are supposed to do when they're not receiving penalties? And that's why, so the gaffes about whether poor people drive cars or whatever are trivial in one respect, yet the whole rhetoric has been about lifters versus leaners, and the perception that people have is that some of the very wealthiest people in the society, a millionaire like Joe Hockey, Arthur Sinodinos, his offsider recently on a board that spent, what, $160,000 on corporate boxes, $30,000 on limousine hire, are convening a program that will see massive cuts to the poorest people.
There's a problem, Lorraine, that, as Jeff points out, in the campaign, yes, there may have been a sort of an ambit promise on fixing the budget or getting rid of debt, but the detail of that, the sort of stuff that Jeff points out, that if you are on New Start, well, 6 months, no money for you, that kind of thing was never taken to the people.
Well, I think there were very specific measures taken to the people. It was more than just an ambit claim, and the government, during the campaign, spent a lot of time talking about different economic measures that they would take. I think the biggest problem is now that they're in government, they're finding, as Fran mentioned, an opposition who are rejecting saving ideas, $5 billion worth of saving ideas that were originally their own. We've seen the rank hypocrisy of Labor, for example, saying they terminated the carbon tax during the election campaign and then opposing the legislation on multiple occasions in Parliament. So there is a real problem, I think, with the opposition nature of politics, and you certainly don't get the bipartisanship on major economic reforms that you got, for example, during the Hawke-Howard era, when there were significant reforms that both major parties came together for, realising that they are in Australia's best interest.
What would John Howard do now, Fran?
John Howard had an incredible ability to connect with the wide electorate. I can remember many occasions. In fact, I'll give you an example. And one of the measures which I personally disagree with, which is reintroducing the automatic indexation on the fuel excise. I had a very public stoush with my former boss over that very issue, because I think it's one of the most iniquitous taxes that we have. You know, the more fuel you use, because of where you live in this country, the more tax you're going to pay.
Howard, of course, famously removed that.
He did. But I remember very well John Howard attending a public meeting out in Healesville, at the RSL in Healesville, and he got up and he argued his case. And then he must have been there for a good 40 minutes listening to people tell him why they thought he was wrong. Now, he was always willing to go out, to listen to people, and to make his case. And that's actually what really has to be done.
And that message now, Jeff Sparrow, to this government would be what?
Well, I think the world has changed since John Howard. I mean, again, it wasn't that long ago people were saying that Tony Abbott was a politician with tremendous skills of persuasion and all the rest of it. But I think what we've seen over the last period is a growing gulf between the bulk of the population and the political class, and a massive disenchantment about politics as usual. And I think that's giving voice to this perception that the people who are making these decisions are very distant from the rest of it. So the metadata stuff was one example. So, you know, the political class, almost without exception, most of the commentators accept that it's fine for ASIO to keep track of every website that you visit. I think most ordinary people are appalled at this notion that everything you do on the internet is going to be visible to some security agency.
A very quick last point, Lorraine Finlay, a connected government.
I think there are broader problems with the political system in terms of connectedness. There was a recent study released last week by ANU that showed only 56% of people believe their vote actually makes a difference. And what's worse, only 42% of 18 to 29-year-olds actually believe that democracy is the preferable form of government in Australia. That just shows a really deep-seated problem.
Those are our troubling times. Interesting conversation. The great tragedy of it is, of course, that we didn't get to talk about the PM's comments on Scotland. But perhaps for another day. Thanks to our outsiders this morning, they've been Lorraine Finlay, Director of Mooting and Law, a law lecturer at Murdoch University, Fran Bailey, former Liberal member for the Victorian seat of McEwen, and Jeff Sparrow, writer, editor of the literary magazine Overland. It's 5 away from 10.
Hello, Monty.
Oh, hello, Jonty. Sorry to hear you've been kicked out of the Young Liberals. Those rotters.
Oh, I know, Monty. What is wrong with this country when one can't indulge in a long, homophobic, sexist, racist rant in the privacy of one's own social media network? I've had to resign from the Young Liberals, the University Liberal Club, and the East Melbourne Misogynist Association, and worst of all, I've lost pre-selection for the safe seat of Nicely. Father's absolutely furious.
I'm Australian. What about free speech, Jonty?
I know, Monty. Well, I won't have it. I'm going to stand up for my rights as an oppressed, rather well-off, university-educated white male. Or my name isn't Jonty Poffington Woffington.
Oh, yes, me too. Or my name's not Monty Blithering Humpingstoke.
You know, I've decided to form a club for disgraced former Young Liberals.
You mean the federal cabinet?
No, Monty, this is a new organisation for those seeking asylum from persecution. These days, you're not even allowed to say homosexuals don't serve any purpose, or to complain about Jermaine Greer. I mean, that's a national pastime.
You're so right, Jonty. Have you noticed poor people are allowed to drive cars as much as they like, but decent, upstanding young liberal university students aren't allowed to punch walls or call women sluts? It's demeaning and patronising, isn't it?
Oh, look, here's Craig. Hello, Craig. Monty, this is Craig. He's from the Young Nationals. Yes, I know. But Craig got into a spot of bother with a curling iron and a young heifer, so he'll be joining us as well.
Spiffing.
Anyway, all those other fellows who've managed to keep their views secret have gotten into government. And now they're writing policy and running the country. Everyone knows it.
You just have to join your daddy's company and run the country that way.
You know, Monty, you're absolutely right. That's just what I'll do. Thank heavens for capitalism. It really is the great equalizer. All right, fellows, let's all sing the club song. Craig, get your ukulele.
Oh, yes, let's.
Come on, chaps, here we go. The disgraced former Young Liberals anthem. We are a smug and glossy crew, a nasty pack of bullies who obliquely despise the poor, and Muslims show those cats the door. Hey ladies, do you know your place? You see this leer upon my face? This nation needs austerity, as long as it's for you, not me. Imagine how we'd scream and shout if father said we'd go without. Our sexist rants have trouble wrought. Say what you like, just don't get caught. The Liberal Party, on reflection, thinks we should all lose pre-selection. But if no one reads our racist smears, we're ICAT bound in 20 years.
Yeah, well, what a week. Joe Hockey, the son of a pair of Palestinian immigrants who started a delicatessen and commenced to work in the delicatessen 7 days a week. So Joe, the baby of the family, never quite had time to get a cuddle because Mummy and Daddy were busy stocking the shelves, wiping the stock, serving the customers 7 days a week. They're nearly 90 years old and they still work 7 days a week. The most important thing in their lives is making money. And that's the environment that poor little Joe Hockey grew up in. An environment where instead of a cuddle, his parents stuck something expensive in his mouth. And the poor little bugger was overfed to the point where when he went to kindergarten on the very first day, he was called a fat, greasy wog. And he's grown up with a hole in his soul where his self-esteem should be. He's had to have 5/8 or 7/8 of his stomach removed in order to stop him from stuffing himself with calories and becoming pre-terminally morbidly obese. But it means that the only things in his worldview that matter is riches, the ability to consume. It's why he smokes $85 cigars, because he can't eat enough caviar to fill the hole in his soul where his self-esteem should be. He really doesn't think poor people count for anything. He doesn't see any reason why rich people should have to pay taxes, to be squandered, as he sees it, on supporting people who don't pull their own weight in the economy. He doesn't stumble that we don't live in an economy, we live in a society. We live in a society which has just spent 9,700 years destroying all of the feedback mechanisms that keep the homeostasis of the biosphere intact. That doesn't matter to Joe Hockey. He grew up in a delicatessen in Sydney. He's a member of the Australian Liberal Party's New South Wales federal branch. You know, the mob who took the donations from the banned property developers and mining companies and washed them through Canberra and gave them back to the New South Wales Liberal Party? Like the member for, is it Wahroonga? Fella called Tony Abbott. Yeah, he's a federal New South Wales Liberal Party highlight too, isn't he? Interesting how the particular nest of corruption that's getting aired in ICAC has such close connections to the Prime Minister and the Treasurer. Arthur Sinodinos, yeah, $30,000 on hire cars for a single function. And they come up with a budget that says that under 30-year-old Australians have to starve to death for 6 months. And now the latest idea is that anybody who's on federal benefits payments of any kind can be declared a national security risk and cut off their payments. So they're trying to draw a direct link between the dole bludgers they don't want to pay for 6 months being a threat to national security. They're trying to demonise the unemployed and the pensioners as being potential terrorists. Really, that's latest breaking news this weekend. The only thing that's more hot off the press, so to speak, is that Tony Abbott has publicly, in an international forum, declared that it is undemocratic for the Scots to vote for the independence of Scotland. It's against world peace for the Scots to want to be independent. I can only think that the reason Tony Abbott and Comrade Premier Colonel President Putin get along so well is because they both yearn for the long-lost days of empire. Putin yearns for the days of the empire of the Russian Tsar to be recaptured by reenacting the worst parts of the United Soviet Socialist Republic era. And Tony Abbott, he wants to reenact the British Empire. And he can't see how you can have a British Empire if there's not an uck of goob. You've got to have an uck of goob to head the British Empire. UK of Great Britain, uck of goob. Yeah, so Tony Abbott says that anybody in Scotland who votes for independence is undemocratic and anti-world peace. That's the comment of the dickhead who wanted to retrieve bodies out of the debris field of the Malaysian Airlines flight MH17. So instead of trying to talk to the people who held the ground around the debris field, he talked to their enemies in Kiev and caused a major military offensive, which is now poised to pretty much spark off World War III. If the Russians have sent a military convoy across the border into the Ukrainian government claimed territory, and if the Ukrainian government have just destroyed 24 Russian ground craft, armoured personnel carriers and tanks with an artillery attack, yeah, thanks very much, Tony Abbott. You've just about sparked World War III, 100 years after the beginning of World War I. So that's been the week in Australian politics. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.